You probably didn't expect this, that building a stronger mind, a clearer voice, a deeper sense of self would make people around you flinch. You thought evolving would bring respect. Instead, it brought distance. You're not imagining it. The deeper you go into yourself, the quieter they become. The more grounded your energy feels, the more chaotic theirs becomes around you. And what once felt like friendship now feels like walking on glass. But suddenly, people didn't respond the same. Your silence makes them nervous. Your honesty feels like an attack. Your growth, your clarity, it threatens something in them that even they can't explain. They don't say it out loud. Of course, they just change. They tease you a little more. Their compliments carry static. The conversations stay shallow. And when you bring up something real, something that matters, you can feel the room holding its breath. They'll say things like, "You've changed. You're being too intense. Lighten up." They'll call your clarity ego, your solitude, coldness, your truth negativity. What you're witnessing isn't rejection, it's reaction, a deep, unconscious one your mind interprets as loneliness, but is, in fact, your first proof of awakening. Nietzsche once said, and those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music. That's what's happening to you. You're becoming someone they can no longer predict. And that alone is terrifying to them. You're starting to hear something they don't, something quieter, but truer. And your very presence begins to reflect back to them everything they've buried under routines, jokes, and false confidence. Here's the psychological truth. What you're experiencing isn't failure. It's resistance, psychological resistance from others who aren't ready to face what you now see so clearly. Your stillness gets mistaken for arrogance. Why? Because you're no longer playing the emotional games they're used to. Their unease, their jokes, their withdrawal. That's not judgment. That's self-protection. This is called projective discomfort. When your clarity becomes a mirror, not everyone wants to look. Some will laugh. Some will retreat. Some will try to pull you back. Not because you're wrong, but because you make their stagnation visible. And you're becoming real. Growth, in its purest form, is not applause-worthy. It's threatening. Not because you hurt anyone, but because you force them to see what they haven't become. Maybe you've already noticed the subtle signs: the best friend who stopped calling, the partner who suddenly seems cold, the family member who says you're too intense lately. That's the cost of stepping out of their projection. And here's the paradox: this happens before anything great has even happened. You don't have millions. You didn't go viral. You didn't change the world. You just changed your big mindset, changed your worldview. And that is enough to set off alarms, because a strong mind isn't loud. It doesn't perform, but its very presence disrupts every unspoken rule others have been taught to obey. You stopped reacting. You started observing. You say no without guilt. You think slowly. And that alone terrifies people who haven't looked in the mirror in years. You're not being rejected. You're being revealed. And while that feels like loss, it's actually your first taste of sovereignty. So the question isn't, why is everyone treating me this way? The real question is, am I strong enough to stay awake, even if it means walking alone? But here's the problem: if you don't understand this shift, you'll think you're doing something wrong. You'll collapse, apologize, dim your light, and crawl back into their comfort. Don't, because what you're feeling is transformation. It's the rupture between who you were and who you are becoming. So let me ask you something. What if your pain right now isn't a sign that you're failing, What if it's proof that you've started to awaken? Here's something no one ever told you growing up. You weren't born insecure, you were trained to doubt yourself. That anxious voice in your head, the one that asks, "Am I too much?" Or, "What if they don't like me?" That didn't come from nowhere. It was planted, slowly, quietly, repeatedly, until it became yours. You weren't born with self-doubt. You inherited it from parents who were scared of standing out, from teachers who rewarded obedience over curiosity, from friends who mocked you when you questioned the script. And the more you adjusted, the more you disappeared. Because that's what the world teaches you. Don't be real, be acceptable. Nietzsche called this slave morality, a quiet system designed to reward sameness and punish originality, where strength is labeled arrogance, where independence is labeled selfishness, where clarity is labeled rudeness. And here's the twisted part: if you play by those rules long enough, you'll start to feel guilty just for existing honestly. Ever catch yourself saying, "Sorry, I just have a different opinion," or "Sorry, I don't feel like going," or "Sorry, I need space"? Apologizing for your needs, your truth, your instincts. That's not humility, that's programming. You were trained to apologize for your strength, long before you even knew if you had any. Carl Jung had a name for this inner war. He called it the conflict between the persona and the shadow. The persona is the mask you wear to stay liked, approved, safe, the good girl, the chill guy, the quiet achiever, and it works until it doesn't, because behind the mask is your shadow, the parts you repress just to fit in. Your fire, your anger, your boundaries, your instincts. The more you pretend, the heavier it gets. Until one day, you can't fake it anymore. You snap. You shut down. You feel hollow, and you don't even know why. This is the rebellion, the quiet uprising inside you, when your soul starts whispering, "I'm not okay with this anymore." When you start saying no to things you used to tolerate, when your laughter fades because it isn't real, and people notice, they say you're acting different, that you're being difficult. What they mean is, you stopped playing the role they liked. You didn't change. You just stopped lying. Think about it. How many parts of your life right now are still running on old scripts? Things you said yes to out of habit. People you still chase because you were trained to prove your worth. Rooms you sit in even though your soul has already left. It's like walking through a house built by someone else, living by rules you never agreed to. But you keep tiptoeing around because you're afraid to wake the ones who are still asleep. That's the contradiction. Your truth wants freedom, but your training wants permission. And now there's tension inside, between the part of you that wants to be free and the part of you that's terrified of losing love. So here's the question I want you to sit with. What if your self-doubt was never yours to begin with? What if it was installed, taught, rewarded? And what if breaking free doesn't make you a bad person, but finally makes you real? There comes a moment, quiet, sudden, undeniable, when the story you've been living stops working. Maybe it happens in a conversation where you hear yourself talking and you realize none of it is really you. Maybe it hits you at night, when things get still, and you feel a strange distance between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. Either way, it hits, and when it does, the scaffolding of your identity begins to crack. Not from failure, but from too much truth. You start to see how much of your life was built to be accepted, how many of your opinions were inherited, how many of your dreams were actually someone else's checklist, And that realization doesn't come with relief, it comes with collapse. You feel grief, not for a person, but for a version of you that never got to be real. You feel confusion, because if you're not who you've been, then who are you now? This isn't a bad day. It's not just burnout. It's what Carl Jung described as the ego death, the unraveling of a self you created to survive, not to live. And that unraveling is violent, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in quiet ways, emotionally raw ways. You wake up and can't stand your job. You look at your partner and feel like strangers. You scroll your phone and everything feels fake. Your soul is rejecting the script. Nietzsche called this creative destruction the tearing down of all that is false, so something new can be born. But most people stop at the destruction because it feels like losing everything. And in a way, you are. You'll want to fix it, patch it up, go back. Pretend you're fine, but the truth is, you're not breaking down. You're breaking open. And no one warns you about how lonely this part feels. There's no map, no applause, no encouragement, just silence and rubble. You're not who you were, but you're not yet who you're becoming. And in that in-between, you feel invisible. You may even call it depression. You may try to distract yourself from it, but it isn't illness, it's identity collapse. You're mourning a mask, and that grief is real, because that mask protected you. It got you love, it kept you safe, it helped you fit in, but now it's suffocating you. And underneath it, buried beneath years of being who they needed you to be, is someone who was never allowed to fully exist. That someone is finally waking up. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." And this right here, this disintegration, is your why trying to be born. So if you feel like you're falling apart good, that means the mask is coming off. That means the house you built from other people's expectations is finally burning down. This is not depression, it's demolition, and it's the beginning of freedom. Let's talk about the loneliness, the kind that comes after your mask falls off, the kind that doesn't feel dramatic, it just feels cold, quiet. You start to realize you have less in common with the people around you. Conversations feel hollow, jokes fall flat, gatherings exhaust you, and deep down you feel it, you're drifting away. But here's the truth. This isn't a punishment. It's a rite of passage, a sacred one. Nietzsche knew this well. He wrote, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." And that's exactly what happens when you rise in awareness. You appear different, distant, difficult, not because you are, but because they haven't seen your sky. Individuation, the process Jung called becoming your true self, requires separation, and not just physical, psychic, emotional, a kind of detachment that strips away what no longer fits. It's not that you're better than anyone, it's that you can no longer pretend. You've outgrown the version of you who stayed silent to be liked, who laughed to avoid tension, who kept showing up for people who never truly saw you. You walk into what feels like a desert. No maps, no applause, just wind and questions. And it's in this silence that your false identities die and your real voice begins to speak. Most people avoid this desert their entire lives. They stay in noisy rooms, loud relationships, chaotic friendships, because solitude is terrifying when you've spent your life relying on noise to feel like you exist. But here's the truth. No one says out loud, you cannot become powerful if you're still afraid of being alone. Schopenhauer once said that intelligent people tend to need less social stimulation not because they hate others, but because their inner world is already rich, already deep. Solitude is not emptiness for them. it's nourishment. So when you find yourself alone, misunderstood, and uncertain, that's not regression. That's transformation. Think of it like this. Every powerful transformation requires silence. A snake sheds its skin in hiding. A butterfly forms its wings in a cocoon. You're not supposed to be visible during this part. You're supposed to be becoming. And yes, it's hard. The silence can feel brutal. The phone barely rings. People stop checking in. You begin to wonder if you've gone too far. If maybe you made a mistake, but you didn't. You just stopped shrinking. The modern world doesn't want you in solitude, because solitude is where you think for yourself, where you unplug from groupthink, where you see clearly what society needs you to ignore. That's why modern loneliness is weaponized. We're trained to fear it, to equate aloneness with failure, to think that if we're not surrounded, we must be broken. But maybe the truth is the opposite. Maybe isolation is where you reclaim your attention, your soul, your strength. Maybe this loneliness isn't exile, it's initiation. Because what if you're not lost at all? What if you've just stopped living someone else's life? Let's be honest, people don't like when you change. Not really. They say they support growth, but only the kind that doesn't outgrow them. Once you start seeing things clearly, really clearly, you'll notice the shift. The energy changes, the room gets colder. Not because you became unkind, but because you became honest. Your silence is suddenly mistaken for arrogance, your clarity mistaken for threat. And that's the invisible war no one talks about. The quiet backlash that comes when you stop playing dumb to make others feel smart. When you stop apologizing for seeing through the performance. Nietzsche called this herd morality a psychological system designed to keep people small and synchronized. It turns obedience into virtue and frames rebellion as sin. In this system, real strength is framed as ego. Depth is called drama. Detachment is seen as being cold and thinking for yourself. That's the biggest offense of all. You start to feel it emotionally. Friends pulling away. Colleagues side-eyeing you. Family members saying, "You've changed." What they really mean is you're no longer manageable. Jung explained this through individuation. When one person in a tribe starts becoming more conscious, more whole, the group unconsciously resists. Not out of hatred, but out of psychological defense. Your presence reflects their unprocessed pain. Your growth makes them confront their stagnation, and instead of rising with you, most people will unite to exile you. This is called emotional triangulation, when others join forces, subtly or overtly, to shame you back into the mold. They won't always be aggressive. Sometimes they'll be nice, patronizing, viling. But underneath it all is one goal: make you doubt yourself. Slave morality depends on this. It flips the script, tells you humility is holier than confidence, that silence is more virtuous than truth, that being liked is more important than being whole. And so you start to question yourself, am I really the problem? Maybe I should just stay quiet. Maybe being small is safer. But here's the truth. You're not the problem. You're the mirror. And they're flinching. Because the moment you stop needing applause, you become uncontrollable. And society doesn't know what to do with people who don't need permission to be powerful. You become dangerous not because you attack others, but because you refuse to need them. And that's the most radical act there is. To no longer be seduced by consensus. To stop shrinking just to stay invited. To stand calmly in a room full of noise and say nothing but mean everything. Remember, the herd survives by sameness. But you came here to remember who you are, not to blend in, not to be liked, to awaken. And sometimes the price of awakening is exile, but the reward, inner sovereignty. and nothing is more powerful than that. Let's drop the illusion. Real power isn't loud. It's not about domination or control, or convincing others to see you a certain way. Real power is invisible until it's tested, and when it is, it doesn't flinch, because it's built from the inside out. You can't borrow this kind of power. You can't fake it. And you definitely can't perform it. It has to be built, brick by brick, from experience, pain, boundaries, clarity, and silence, and the structure you're building. It rests on 4 immovable pillars. Miss one, and you wobble. Master all 4, and you become someone others feel before you even speak. Pillar 1, clarity. You must know your value, not the values handed to you by family, culture, or fear, but the ones born in your own fire. Without clarity, you become reactive. You overgive. You say yes when your soul is screaming no. Clarity is knowing who you are without asking anyone else to confirm it. It's the ability to walk away, not because you're angry, but because it no longer aligns. Pillar 2, restraint. Power without restraint is chaos. But when you can feel provoked and choose stillness, that's when you begin to command your energy. Restraint is strength that doesn't advertise itself. It's saying nothing when you could destroy someone with truth. It's knowing the difference between reaction and intention. Pillar 3, presence. This one is rare. True presence is when your attention belongs to you again, not scattered across notifications, people-pleasing, or anxiety, but rooted, observant, whole. When you're truly present, people don't just hear your words, they feel your essence. You listen differently. You breathe differently. You don't shrink or puff up. You just are. Pillar 4, sovereignty. This is the crown. Sovereignty means you don't chase understanding. You don't justify your truth. You don't need to be liked in order to feel safe. It's not a performance of strength. It's the quiet confidence that says, I belong to myself now. But how do you actually build this? What does the daily architecture of inner power look like? Start simple stillness before noise. Give your nervous system a home before the world tries to pull you apart. Observation over assumption. Slow down your interpretations. People reveal everything in silence. Refuse instant reaction. Breathe before responding. That's where your power hides, in the pause. These aren't hacks, they're habits. And over time, they reshape you. Because here's the truth. You become a mountain not by yelling louder, but by standing still longer. Mountains don't argue with the wind. They don't flinch when the storm rolls in. They endure. That's the kind of presence you're building. That's what mastery feels like. So ask yourself, what are you still giving your power to? A memory, a judgment, a version of you that no longer exists. Inner strength isn't about becoming more, it's about becoming aligned. And when you're aligned, you no longer chase peace, you are peace. So what does a terrifyingly strong mind actually look like? Not the kind that intimidates with noise, the kind that unsettles with silence. When Nietzsche spoke of the Übermensch, the Overman, he wasn't describing someone who dominates others. He was describing someone who is no longer programmable. The Overman isn't defined by external power. He's defined by internal command. He doesn't need attention. He doesn't even need approval. He operates from a different source. He has died to the identity the world tried to give him and built something original in its place. He's unattached to validation, immune to flattery, and dangerously clear. That's why people struggle around him, because he isn't playing the game. And when you stop playing, you expose the game for what it is. He doesn't belong to tribes. He doesn't chant the slogans of the group. He doesn't soften his language just to be digestible. His psychology is sovereign. His presence makes others feel watched not because he's judging them, but because he's awake. And that's rare. He does not explain. He does not apologize for existing. He lets people misunderstand him and moves on because he knows explanation is often just a form of begging. He's not overly happy, nor bitter. His emotional tone is calm but watchful. He listens more than he speaks. And when he does speak, it lands, not because it's loud, but because it's clean. Jung would say this is a man who has integrated his shadow, who doesn't deny his darkness, but doesn't serve it either. The Overman doesn't need to repress his chaos. He commands it. And because of that, he doesn't flinch. Not when attacked. Not when praised. Not when abandoned. He knows himself. And that knowing is what makes him unsettling. He becomes the mirror in the room. And people either admire it or flinch from it, because seeing someone who doesn't need anything makes them question everything. And when he walks in, the air shifts. People notice, but they don't know why. He doesn't need the room to welcome him. The room bends around him. He doesn't perform. He embodies. This is not a state you're born with. It's something you build. Through grief, through solitude, through the rejection of every false mask you once wore, because when you finally stop begging the world to see you, the world has to. So remember when the Overman walks in, the room changes, not because he demands it, but because he no longer needs it. By now you feel it. That low hum in your chest, that quiet realization, you can't go back. Not to the performance, not to the mask, not to the version of you that begged to be understood, liked, accepted. There comes a moment in every awakening where you reach the fork in the road. One path loops you back into comfort safe, predictable, scripted. The other fire, silence, sovereignty, and everything that makes it worth it. And here's what most never tell you. Awakening hurts. It costs more than people expect. You will lose people, not because you became toxic, but because you stopped pretending. You will lose opportunities, not because you weren't good enough, but because you refused to bend. You will lose the ability to tolerate anything less than truth. That's what real transformation does. It doesn't upgrade your old life. It ends it. And when that happens, you don't get to take both paths. You don't get to be liked and free, soft and sovereign, applauded and authentic. You have to choose. Nietzsche once said, "No price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself." And he meant it, because this isn't about philosophy anymore. It's about survival, your survival, not physically, but psychically. Can you live another year as a diluted version of yourself? Can you keep handing out pieces of your power just to avoid discomfort? Or will you finally choose discomfort over delusion, truth over tribe, freedom over familiarity? The world will offer you distractions, numbness, shiny illusions, false promises, echo chambers, the seduction of staying asleep. But you'll know. You'll feel the rot under the surface, the anxiety that grows every time you say yes when you mean no, the hollowness that follows every performance. At some point, you'll have to decide, do I want to be understood or do I want to be free? And understand this freedom doesn't come with applause, it comes with silence, the kind where you meet yourself fully. Without filters, without scripts, without a role to play. That silence is sacred, but it's also heavy, which is why most people will run from it their entire lives. But not you, not anymore. You've come too far. You've peeled back too many lies. You've buried too many versions of yourself to stop now. And so this is your final right. No more waiting. No more asking for permission. No more being polite about your truth. This is where you decide to either remain liked or become liberated, to keep chasing approval, or stand as your own authority, to keep shrinking, or finally rise, because in the end, this was never about being liked. It was never about being right. It was about becoming whole, and whole people don't perform. They exist, fully, clearly, unshakably. So go, not back, but forward, not louder, but deeper, not faster, but truer, because this is the real beginning, and the world will never be the same again.